In 2016, Snapped Killer Couples told the story of Danielle Hudson and Chaz Blackshear, a young couple whose lives took a deadly turn with a series of violent crimes.
You had fear within the Houston community because these two murders were back to back.
I was scared of the whole situation.
She was always for the shoot. They couldn't take you to jail.
Following his conviction for murder, Chaz Blackshear sought to clear Danielle's name.
I'm gonna take whatever they give me, even if it's the needle. She can go home. I said I'd die for her, and I did.
Now, Chaz Blackshear returns to talk about the man he was and the perspective he's formed after 15 years behind bars and separated from Danielle.
I was easily influenced behind the wrong reasons. I led her wrong, I led myself wrong.
And for the first time, Danielle Hudson sits down for an exclusive interview and reveals her role in the crimes.
I didn't know that my decision would cause as much damage.
She's gotten to a place where, at this point, what good does it do me to lie?
I'm truly sorry that these tragic events had to happen, and I'm willing to take full responsibility. My name is Danielle Hudson. I'm choosing to do this interview because I feel like it's time for my side of the story to be out there. It's like something just kept pulling me to do it. I'm not like a bad person. I just made up a lot of bad decisions because of the situation I was in. I was so stuck on wanting love that I let me wanting love cloud my judgment.
My name is Chaz Blackshear. I decided to do this interview because the first time I was interviewed by Snap, I was a different person than who I am now. I was young, dumb, in pain, immature, every bad name you can think of. But I destroyed two families that didn't deserve it. My love was so open and my loyalty was so strong, I was easily influenced behind the wrong reasons.
At the time, we was very in love. Now that I've grown, I really wouldn't say it was in love because when you're really in love with somebody, you wouldn't let them do what happened between us, you know? You would try to steer them on a better path.
Sometimes people feel like that's how they prove their love to other people, by being loyal to a fault where there's no boundary at all. He was willing to do anything and everything for her. Even where she should have been accountable, he removed the accountability for her. They could have used their energy for something so much better, but they didn't.
October 12th, 2010. Authorities in Houston receive a concerning 911 call from a utility worker who has just discovered a body.
He had been shot twice and rolled down a drainage ditch.
The detectives at the scene, they have this body that has been rolled down a hill as if it's a piece of trash. His pants pockets were turned inside out. Pockets being turned inside out, people are looking for something.
Detectives determined the victim was shot in the chest and head. A passport in his back pocket identifies the man as 32-year-old Mohammed El Sayed. Detectives contact Mohammed's family to inform them of his death.
This is a family man with small children. While in the middle of their grieving, the detectives get exposed to who Mohammed El Sayed was. It's there that we learn that Mohammed was a cab driver. He works hard. Did he want to be a cab driver the rest of his life? No, he was in school, but he was also working hard, trying to provide a living for his wife and kids.
According to his devastated family, Mohammed left for his shift in his taxi cab the night before, but he never made it home.
He didn't show up, he hadn't made phone calls, so there was a concern that something had happened to him. The only thing we're missing is the cab.
Detectives immediately put out a bulletin on Mohammed's cab.
The cab was then discovered hours later, back on the west side of town. And what was inside this cab? 2 shell casings, 380 casings, papers strewn, the glove box open. As part of the follow-up investigation, we made contact with the actual yellow cab company and their security department. It's there that we learned that, yes, they can be able to isolate and tell us what was the last call that Mohammed al-Sayed was dispatched to. But not only that, they would have a recording of the actual phone call that came in to the call center. So we immediately obtained the actual physical tape of the suspect calling in, asking to be picked up.
Okay, this is Michelle. Can I help you?
Hello, could I have a cab to 1905 Blackshear?
All right, can I get a name?
Shante.
After listening to the tapes and the name Shante, we knew we had to find her. So one of the first ways to find Shante was to trace the number. And it was all traced a few hundred yards west at a 7-Eleven at one of the phone booths. My partner and I, we travel out to that convenience store and we meet with the clerk. It was a gift. 7-Eleven, that convenience store, they would have video.
Detectives note the timing of the call lines up with that of the surveillance footage.
Right there on video, we see a black female with a young black male, thin. We had him. We just didn't know who it is and who was this couple making that phone call.
Then, on October 14th, a Houston police patrol officer calls in another gruesome discovery.
A night shift patrol officer notices that there's some kind of, almost like a fog, a glow coming from a parking lot. And so he's drawn to that and he pulls up and he sees that it's a vehicle. Not just a vehicle, but a yellow cab that seems to have been burned. And as this patrol officer steps out of his car, he gets closer and closer. Sure enough, that's where he finds the driver of the yellow cab. He's strapped into this cab, almost halfway in, halfway out, trying to get away. So we're able to confirm that he was shot on the right side of the head. Not only did you have a combination of fresh human flesh, burnt smell, you also had the material of the vehicle, but also a distinct smell of gasoline. It's an accelerant. People believe that fire destroys evidence. And fire can destroy evidence, but not always. The glove box is open. It appears things have been disheveled. Papers on the floor. Somebody's looking for something. And in this case, we believed it was money.
Forensic technicians lift multiple sets of fingerprints from inside the cab and find shell casings that appear to match the 380 casings found in the first cab.
I'd let science and our lab do the official connection, but I knew from an investigative standpoint, these murders were connected.
Police identify the second victim from his driver's license found in his pocket.
He was identified as Blaze Nokanaka. Again, it's a person with a family and people who loved him.
Detectives contact the cab company, requesting the call for Blaze's ride. They receive a copy in minutes.
Thanks for calling Yellow Cab. How may I help you?
Yes, somebody needs a cab over here on 1900 David Ashton at Chevron.
What is your name?
I'm Chaz.
Your name is what?
Chaz.
Chad?
Yeah.
Detectives determine that the call for Blaze's ride was made from a gas station payphone right down the street from the location of the first victim's ride request.
We have 2 phone booths, one at the corner of Dairy Ashford and Whittington, and then one just a little bit further west at another gas station. Not huge walks, maybe a quarter of a mile at most between the two. These are people who are on foot. Our suspects, they're walking. This is their neighborhood.
We could be put away for a long time. So in my mind, my initial thought was like fear. But then I got over it. I'm like, okay, I mean, whatever happens, happens. I know that sounds bad, but that's like what I thought.
Within 48 hours, we've had 2 yellow cab drivers murdered. So what did we have? Did we have a serial killer? We're worried. We're very nervous that the pace of the killings are going to pick up. We didn't know what was next.
Coming up, with the suspects at large, the stakes get higher.
This is 2 lives that's been lost. So in my mind, I'm like, what if he comes for me next?
And authorities pinpoint their location.
They came, kicked the door down. It was guns everywhere.
I remember just feeling like it was the end.
In October 2010, Houston police are investigating the murders of 2 local cab drivers within 48 hours of one another.
You had fear within the Houston community because these 2 murders were back to back.
There's a sense of urgency that just catches fire at that point.
At the scene of the burned-out cab of Blaze Wakanaka, detectives discover security cameras pointing directly at the crime scene. When they review the footage, they are stunned to find clear images of their suspects.
We went up to the security office and we watched it. We were amazed. It shows a yellow cab pulling up in the early morning hours. You can see a little light on because the door has been opened. Then there's a flash. And then there's a female that gets out of the passenger side of the vehicle, and she's clearly talking to somebody.
I remember Chaz told me to get out. He told me to get out and go check the building, and I did that.
She then walks in the parking lot, and she stares straight at the camera. And it's then that she starts to run. She's in a full sprint. A huge flash. The cab has now been caught on fire. And so the brightness of the initial flames being lit. And then you see a thin black male running behind the female.
The cab was already going up in flames. And I just remember kept burning.
While detectives wait for a fingerprint match from Blaze's car, the crime lab confirms that the casings from both taxi cabs are from the same .380 gun.
It was a Cobra .380. And in the city of Houston, out of all the crimes that took place, there was only one theft report involving a Cobra .380. And that one report showed that that particular .380 was stolen by a young man and a young female. The homeowner allowed them to live with him for a little bit. And after a disagreement, and he put them out and said they could no longer stay with them, he noticed that his weapon was missing.
The owner of the stolen gun not only filed a police report, he gave physical descriptions and names: Danielle Hudson and Chaz Blackshear.
The minute I looked at the names and the descriptions, literally, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. This is them. I call our latent print people and I say, I have a suspect, Chaz Blackshear. He goes, well, that's who this print belongs to. We just found it. I almost fell out of my seat.
Based on the general description, I'm fairly confident that Danielle Hudson, she's the girl in the video.
Chaz's fingerprints are a match in the system from a drug possession arrest just months earlier.
We're able to immediately obtain an arrest warrant, a pocket warrant for Chaz Blackshear. By having an arrest warrant, we're able to bring in our federal partners, the United States Marshal Service, and their Violent Offenders Task Force. And what they're able to do is they have a whole team of guys that can hunt and track cell phones. So we provided them with the cell phone number of Chaz Blackshear. And as soon as we went, quote, live on Chaz Blackshear's phone, it brought us back to that same location off of Derry Ashford and Whittington, between those two phone booths, and then no signal. It went dead. We found out Chaz had no more minutes, he couldn't use his phone. Well, a very sharp U.S. Marshal, been in the business a long time, I'll take care of it. He put some minutes on Chaz's phone. And right away, Chaz fired up his phone, and the marshals were able to not just find where Chaz was, but pinpoint the exact apartment.
On October 15th, 3 days into the investigation, a SWAT team descends on Chaz's location.
Because of the brutality of the crime, and anytime you make an arrest, there's always concern for safety. And that's why the arrest of Chaz is not taken lightly. I mean, we're talking tactical helmets, tactical gear, rifles, pistols out, real coordination to prevent any kind of safety issues involved to not just the officers, but the people that might be in the apartment.
I remember I was sitting on the floor of the apartment, me and Chaz and my son, and then just all of a sudden, out of the blue, the phone turned back on. The phone rang. They said they asked for somebody, but I don't remember the name that they asked for, and I was like, who? And by the time I said that, they hung up, so which gave them enough time for the location to come find us. And then like right after that, the SWAT came in.
I remember that night, they came, kicked the door down. It was guns everywhere.
It was just like, okay, this is happening. And they took me to questioning. That's when I was like, damn, this is for real.
On October 15th, 2010, Danielle Hudson and Chaz Blackshear have been transported to the Houston Police Department for questioning in the brutal murders of local cab drivers Mohammed El Sayed and Blaze Wakanaka.
We end up on the 6th floor at 1200 Travis, the Houston Homicide Headquarters, and we have Danielle in one interview room and Chaz in the next interview room.
The time is approximately 9:50 p.m. It is October 15th, 2010. And in the room with me is Chaz. And what's your last name, Chaz?
Blackshear.
Blackshear.
Chaz revealed that he had been in the Navy, had prior military service, was from the Dallas area, extremely intelligent and sharp. He wasn't your typical street person.
I did have a pretty hard-going childhood. I was adopted, but before that, my mother was addicted to drugs.
Chaz didn't know his dad, and Mom ended up in prison. But fortunately for Chaz, he ended up staying with a nice family, which was his aunt and uncle, who also had their own children.
Now I'm trying to fit in with them. I'm also trying to be who I feel like I am outside of the house. So my mind is at a tug of war. So I never really found my place.
After high school, Chaz joined the Navy.
Honestly, I joined the military to run, to escape. I was running from life, for what I knew. I wanted to get away, be on my own, and not have to worry about nobody telling me what to do, so I thought.
Just 2 years later, Chaz was discharged for behavioral misconduct.
That went sideways because I didn't have the maturity for that. A lot of people say the military makes a man. I'm living proof that it will not. So I just got discharged, right? So I was in Dallas for a little bit, probably about 4 or 5 months. Me and my older cousin was running a smoke shop in Oak Cliff. But that really wasn't doing enough, I guess you could say. My grandmother's whole side of the family lives in Houston. So my mother and my grandmother had the idea, well, why don't you move to Houston? You always talked about it, you always wanted to. Well, now's the time. So I made the decision to live in Houston.
I was happy when he moved to Houston. That way I can get to bond with him, be around him more, talk with him more.
I met Danielle when I was hustling. My cousin Erica had a friend and it was her.
Well, Danielle, she was already pretty much with me, staying with me. My cousin Chaz lost his apartment. He ended up staying with me. That's how they linked up.
I felt like we were both looking for a sense of belonging and love, and we found it within each other. Every time when I come home from hustling or come home from just being in the streets and she's there, it felt like a home, what I thought a home should be. And I had never felt like that with anyone.
Just 5 months into their relationship, Danielle and Chaz are suspects in a double homicide. In an interrogation room, detectives confront Chaz about the murder of Mohammed El Sayed on October 12th.
So I want you to go back to Wednesday, 9, 10 o'clock, around in there, nighttime, basically. And I want you to start telling me what you and Danielle were doing.
We watched the movie. I don't know we ain't go nowhere till about maybe 11, 12. Okay. I don't remember because we had called a cab.
Okay. And where did y'all go? Where did you tell him to tell y'all? Where did you tell him?
We wanted him to take us to the Steeples.
Where's that?
The Steeples is like right down the street.
Okay.
We wanted him to take us to the Steeples, but we didn't have enough of a cab for it. So he went halfway, and we told him to drop us off at the stop sign, so we can go ahead and walk the rest of the way because it wasn't that far. So we went ahead and walked back over.
But Chaz insists they were just customers.
He just took us to the stop sign, and we ain't seen him since.
Didn't make any sense, though. What is the coincidence that the 2 cabs that they just happen to be customers in, we have 2 dead drivers?
Detectives confront Chaz with the physical evidence in both Mohammed El Sayed and Blaze Wakanaka's murders.
I'm going to be straightforward with you. We've got 3 video cameras on that building. And all 3 of those video cameras capture you and Daniela and what you all did in the parking lot.
Okay, but that couldn't have been us because I told you where we went.
Well, it is you.
We did not kill anybody.
Honestly, I can't even think of the mind frame I was in. All I know, I didn't want to get in trouble for it.
With Chaz refusing to cooperate, detectives shift their attention to his girlfriend, Danielle.
Right now, I have no charges against you. Do you understand that?
Yes.
What I'd like to do is for you to, first of all, tell me about Chaz.
And I stayed with him and we've been with each other for like 5 months.
Okay. Tell me about what happened.
They kept asking me, like, what happened? I kept saying, I don't know. And they left. And then they came back, and that's when they read me my rights.
There's been a series of events that have gone on. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
She initially started talking, bit by bit.
I did not think I would get in trouble. I know that sounds really dumb, but I did not think that at all because I was like, well, I'm not the one who pulled the trigger.
On October 15th, 2010, Houston detectives are interviewing 21-year-old Danielle Hudson after evidence points at her and her boyfriend Chaz Blackshear as the primary suspects in the murders of 2 local cab drivers.
The severity of it didn't just hit me yet. I just wanted to go home and take care of my son.
Originally from Colorado, Danielle had a rocky upbringing.
My grandmother raised me. My parents wasn't stable enough, so she took me. I have a brother, so she took me and him in, and she raised us.
We were 12 years old when I met Danielle, 12, 13. We lived in the same apartment. She lived with her grandma. I lived with my grandmother.
I really didn't have a lot of guidance, so I just chose to be in the streets and just doing whatever I wanted to do.
At the age of 20, Danielle became a single mom.
I felt like it was my new beginning to give my son something that I never had. When I had my son, it was a very beautiful experience.
Danielle's future with her son seemed even brighter after her friend Erica introduced her to 21-year-old Chaz Blackshear.
He always wanted me to know what my worth was. And he always would tell me, you're beautiful, you deserve this. And not only him and my son, they had a very great connection. Money was the biggest challenge in our relationship because we didn't have enough to buy food and pay bills and stuff like that.
Had they had money, been able to take care of themselves, this situation probably wouldn't have happened.
In an interrogation room, detectives asked Danielle to explain what happened to Mohammed El Sayed on the night of October 12th.
Chaz told me, he said that we'll call the cab and he was just gonna jack the man.
Danielle tells detectives that after the cab arrived, she and Chaz got in. Only moments later, Chaz pulled the gun on the driver and ordered him to stop in a dark alley.
I heard him cock the gun, and so that's when he was open the door, and I opened the door, and that's when he told the cab driver, put the car in park. You come to the back, and he was he told me, he said, you get in the front seat and you drive. And so that's when the cab driver got to the back, I got out and I got to the front, and so I started driving.
She talked about how the cab driver himself was begging and pleading that he was a father, and a father, please don't do this. Okay, where does he shoot him?
I don't know, I didn't see where he shooting because I was driving, I just heard the loud gun sound.
I remember telling him that was an innocent person. Everything is just happening fast.
So I stopped right here and he told me turn off the car and turn off the lights. So I did, and that's when he went to pulling the man out. He was kicking him down the hill, and the man rolled into the body.
I mean, that happens there. Then where do you go with the cab?
He told me to park the car on the side street right there with the U-Haul things.
Okay.
And to leave the car, whatever. And when I got out, he wiped out everything. I remember going in the glove department and getting the wallet out.
Okay. And how much money did you get out of there?
There wasn't no money in there.
Danielle tells detectives that 2 nights later, they repeated Chaz's scheme.
So we walked to Valero, and we called the cab, waited for the cab to come. We got in the cab. We told him to turn right there, so he turned down that street. He had the man to stop or whatever. Chaz told me, he said, get out. The cab driver was like, what are y'all up to? And I was still outside of the cab when he cocked the gun. And so I guess that's when the cab driver, heard him cock the gun. So he went to reaching for his seatbelt to get out the cab. And that's when Chaz shot him. but I didn't know that he was gonna put it on fire. I started running fast after the gunshots. I didn't know he was gonna set the car on fire.
Danielle's story lines up with the evidence, except for one critical detail.
Why, if she thought it was just going to be a robbery, would anybody bring accelerant with them to a scene of a robbery? But how much money did he get from this cab driver?
Or something. I think 130.
And where was that money?
In the man's pocket.
In the end, do you have any responsibility for what's going on? What do you think you could have done to separate yourself more from this situation?
I should never went. I should have just told him, like...
When he talked to you about robbing the first cab driver, what was the first thing you could have done?
Said, no, that's not a good idea.
Okay. When you know people carry guns, can bad things happen?
Yes.
She painted the picture that she was deathly afraid that if she didn't do what he told her to do, that she would be killed or her children would be harmed. But as she told the story didn't make sense as far as her fear because she seemed very comfortable explaining what happened. Extremely comfortable.
At the time, I could have said it was only supposed to be a robbery because Chaz wanted me to make it seem like everything was him. He wanted me to, like, blame him for everything. I didn't want to get in trouble, but, like, being in here for so long, now that's the truth. Like, I knew that it was going to happen.
You're admitting now that you knew that Chaz was going to hurt someone?
Yes.
On October 15th, 2010, Danielle Hudson has just confessed that her boyfriend Chaz Blackshear is responsible for the murders of 2 Houston cab drivers.
She paints a picture that Chaz forced her to take part in these crimes. Danielle wrote a letter to Chaz, and we thought that by her authoring this letter, that Chaz would now finally acknowledge what he did. It was Danielle explaining to Chaz that he made a promise that he would tell the police that she had nothing to do with it. And the ending of her letter was basically, honor your promises. Do what you said you were going to do. It's that letter that's brought in to Chaz to see if it would break him.
Can't see.
Detectives decide to make a deal with Chaz.
Chaz Blackshear was trying to negotiate his terms. Let me talk to Danielle, and then I'll tell you what happened. Ultimately, the reverse happened.
All right, Chaz, you'll see her once I've got the truth. So just start telling the story.
In his desperation to see Danielle, Chaz agrees to tell detectives what happened.
The first one, he picked us and told him to get to the back seat. I pulled the gun out, cocked it, where the money at, and he said it's in the visor.
How many times did you shoot him?
Twice.
Tell me about the second one.
Just like he was finna pull out a gun, or it looked like he was finna pull out a gun. I wasn't mean to shoot him, I was just trying to get the money. And as soon as I cocked it, he went to reach for it, or whatever it was. I shot.
Detectives press Chaz for details about the role Danielle played in the murders.
She had nothing to do with it, though. She didn't. She didn't know.
Here he is willing to lay his life down for me. So it's like, dang, like, you know.
Is there anything else you want to say about it?
I didn't mean for it to happen like that. Can I see it now, please?
At the end of that interview, that is when we had Danielle go into Chaz's interview room. She immediately walked over to Chaz, sat on his lap, wrapped her arms around his neck.
Do you hate me?
That's why I confessed to you. If I hate you, I wouldn't do it.
In the interview room, it's sad because I was more afraid of leaving her than I was afraid of going to jail. But my only concern was her going home to her son.
They can't take you to jail. I told him you ain't know nothing about it.
After a few minutes, detectives return and separate the couple.
I can give him a kiss.
No, ma'am. No.
I feel him doomed, you know? And I just remember, like, I'm not going home. They're not gonna let me go home. I remember, like, really regretting everything.
Despite Chaz's claim that Danielle had nothing to do with the murders, both are charged with capital murder.
The picture that Danielle has painted is that Chaz has been controlling this whole situation. She's fearful of him and so forth and so on. Well, the minute she gets into the room, she jumps into his lap and wraps her arms around him. And it's just the perfect picture of the loving couple. I think that they both equally were the support system for the eventual acts of murder.
Ultimately, in August 2014, Danielle pleads guilty to a lesser charge of murder and is sentenced to 40 years in prison.
I remember just feeling like it was the end, but at the same time, it didn't really feel real. Like, because I guess I didn't take in the severity of somebody actually just losing their life, you know?
Chaz is also offered a plea deal, which he accepts.
I thought I was gonna get the death penalty, and I planned on dying for it, and I would have.
In July 2014, Chaz is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I had already made up in my mind that whatever it is, I'm gonna take it. The plan was to rob him, right? But I knew what it may lead to. I led her wrong, I led myself wrong, and that ended up her losing half of her life, her time, and me losing mine.
Now, 15 years into her sentence, Danielle is finally ready to open up about her role in the crimes.
I came up with the plan about the cab drivers, you know, like them with the money. In a way, I was the mastermind.
After 15 years behind bars, Danielle Hudson is finally coming clean about her role in the murders of Mohammed El Sayed and Blaze Wakanaka.
I know a lot of people might think that maybe I was forced or whatever, but I wasn't. It wasn't a gun to my head like I knew. Me and Chaz, we both in a messed up way we came together. Like, you know, like I told him about the cab drivers and, you know, about the money. I didn't know that my decision would cause as much damage.
So, I mean, how were these crimes supposed to unfold, though? Like, was it the plan to kill someone, or?
Yes, it was supposed to be a robbery, but I don't know, like, yes, they were supposed to die.
And so, why kill them?
I guess so it wouldn't be a witness either.
I think that she's gotten to a place at this point, what good does it do me to lie? It shows that she's remorseful.
If you could say anything to the victims' families, what would you say to them?
I'm sorry, like, if I could take it back, I would. If they could find it in their hearts to forgive me and Chaz for the stupidity of our actions, I hope that they find, like, peace to move forward with life. I'm truly sorry that, you know, these tragic events had to happen.
Chaz uses his story to set an example for younger men in prison.
I grew into a man behind these walls. That's the only reason I'm a man now is because of these prison walls. And the only way that I found my relief was Jesus Christ, was God. I needed that, and I wish I'd have knew it back then. So my goal now is to give people God, give people understanding, give people love that other people aren't giving them, give people a different sense of hope. I know I hurt families, and I've cried many nights and put myself in the shoes of their family, in the shoes of them. I was in so much pain that I really didn't want to do anything else, and I understand I deserve this.
I think I deserve the time that I got. It's life-changing, you know, because it's a struggle in here too.
Have you maintained any kind of relationship with Chaz?
No, I thought co-defendants could write, but they say we can't write. So I don't have no type of nothing.
If you could say something to Chaz, what would you say?
I love you. And just continue to strengthen yourself. And whenever I get out, like, I'm gonna be there.
If you could say anything to Danielle, what would you say?
I tell her, I love you. I pray for her a lot. Keep moving forward. Grow, keep growing. Because I know she's been gone as long as I have, so I know she's grown. Keep growing, keep moving forward.
These two young individuals threw their whole lives away for what? Trying to make a quick buck. Now, they haven't seen each other 15 years, but they were able to have that goodbye with each other, that final time being together. Something Muhammad and Blaze, they never got to have that final goodbye.
The call comes in before dawn, the kind that slices through sleep like a blade through paper, the kind that carries weight before a single word is spoken, and on the other end of the line there is only one sentence, flat and controlled, almost afraid of its own echo. We have a hit. For 30 years the file sat heavy and silent, a box of yellowing reports, grainy photographs, unanswered questions stacked like bricks in a wall no one could climb, and now, in a lab humming with machines that did not exist when the crime was fresh, a sequence of numbers has aligned, a digital whisper has reached back through time, and a name is beginning to surface from the dark. Wisconsin, winter, early 1990s, a town that believed nothing truly terrible could happen here because nothing ever had, because the streets were quiet, the bars closed early, the neighbors waved, and yet one night something snapped, something crossed a line, something left a wound that never healed. It starts, as so many cold cases do, with a body discovered by accident, not by design. A jogger cutting through a wooded trail just after sunrise, breath steaming in the cold air, shoes crunching over frost and leaves, until the path bends and the ground dips and there she is, half hidden by brush, too still, too pale, the wrong shape in the wrong place. Police tape goes up before noon. Squad cars idle, radios crackle, boots press into soft earth already scarred by too many footprints, and detectives stand back, hands on hips, staring, trying to read the scene like a language they half know. She is young, local, someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who had plans for the weekend. There are signs of struggle. There are questions without answers. And within hours the town knows, because small towns always know, and fear spreads faster than facts. The headlines the next morning are blunt and brutal. Mysterious death, suspected homicide, community shaken. Reporters crowd the edge of the woods, microphones pointed at grim-faced officials who say very little and promise everything. We will find who did this. We will not stop. We owe it to her family. Inside the station, the case is given a number, a lead investigator, a sense of urgency that borders on desperation. They canvass neighborhoods, knock on doors, ask the same questions again and again.
Did you see her last night?
Did you hear anything unusual? Do you recognize this car, this jacket, this face? Tips flood in at first, some earnest, some confused, some malicious. A stranger seen at a gas station. A scream heard near the river. A local man with a temper. Each lead is chased, logged, evaluated, and slowly, one by one, they go nowhere. Evidence is collected with the care of the era. Fibers bagged, swabs taken, Photographs snapped on film, developed hours later, pinned to boards. There is biological material, enough to suggest contact, enough to raise hope, but not enough to speak clearly with the technology of the time. DNA testing exists, but it is crude, limited, expensive, and the sample is partial, degraded by exposure, by weather, by time. The lab can say only so much. Inconclusive, insufficient, not usable for comparison. The words land like stones. Detectives keep pushing anyway. They build timelines. They reconstruct her last known movements. They look hard at the people closest to her, because that is where answers often hide. Ex-boyfriends, co-workers, friends of friends. Alibis are checked, rechecked, taken apart, put back together. Nothing sticks. Weeks turn into months. The urgency fades into routine. The command staff starts asking quiet questions about resources, about priorities, about what can realistically be done. The lead detective keeps the file close, takes it home some nights, reads it again, convinced there is something they missed, a detail out of place, a shadow at the edge of a photograph. The family waits, living in a state of suspended grief, answering the phone every time it rings, hoping for news, dreading silence. The town tries to move on, but the case lingers, a cautionary tale, a reminder that safety is an illusion, that bad things do not need permission to happen. Years pass. The file is transferred, then transferred again. Retirements happen. New officers arrive who know the case only as a name, a number, a photograph of a smiling young woman pinned to a corkboard in a hallway. The evidence boxes are sealed, labeled, stacked in storage, surviving floods, moves, budget cuts. The DNA sample remains, frozen in time, waiting for a future no one can yet imagine. Every anniversary brings a brief flare of attention. A local paper runs a piece. A detective gives a quote. Anyone with information is urged to come forward. No one does. The case cools, then freezes, then becomes legend. And then, decades later, the science catches up. DNA databases expand, fed by arrests, by voluntary submissions, by genealogy kits mailed in by people curious about their roots. The lab that once shrugged now hums with power. Samples that were once useless can now be amplified, read, compared. A cold case unit is formed, staffed by investigators who specialize in patience, in revisiting the past without being trapped by it. They open the Wisconsin file with fresh eyes. They lay out the evidence on clean tables. They read the reports, note the assumptions, the dead ends. They send the biological material back to the lab, not expecting much because hope has been punished here before. This time, the result is different. A partial profile emerges, clearer than anyone dared hope. It is uploaded, compared, cross-referenced against millions of entries. At first, nothing. Then, a distant match. Not a suspect, not a name anyone recognizes, but a genetic breadcrumb, a relative, far removed, connected by blood but separated by decades and choices. The room goes quiet. Screens glow. The numbers do not lie. A family tree begins to take shape, branches drawn backward and outward, names added, lives traced across states and years. Investigators become genealogists, historians, detectives of DNA, piecing together how a stranger in a database could lead them to a killer who vanished into the noise of everyday life. They work methodically, carefully, knowing that a mistake here could undo everything. Each potential candidate is evaluated against the facts of the case.
Age,
Location,
opportunity, history.
One by one, the branches are pruned until a single name remains, a man who lived in the area at the time, a man who has never been charged, never convicted, never officially linked to violence, a man who built a life while the victim's family marked time in absence. Surveillance begins quietly. Trash pulls, coffee cups, a discarded napkin, a cigarette butt, ordinary objects, collected with extraordinary intent. The lab confirms what the numbers have been hinting at all along. The DNA matches. The past has found the present. But for now, in this moment, the story is still unfinished. The arrest has not yet been made. The community does not yet know. The family has not yet been told. There is only the weight of what is coming, the knowledge that after 30 years of silence, the case is about to speak, and when it does, it will change everything. Because justice delayed does not arrive quietly, it arrives like a storm, tearing through old assumptions, reopening wounds, forcing a reckoning with the truth that some ghosts never leave, they only wait. The moment the match is confirmed, the room does not erupt, it contracts, shoulders tightening, breaths held, because everyone in that lab understands what this means, understands the gravity of pulling a name out of 3 decades of darkness, understands that a life built on the assumption of escape is about to fracture. The investigators don't celebrate. They don't speak loudly. They gather their notes, shut down screens, and step back into hallways that smell faintly of disinfectant and old paper, carrying the weight of what they now know. Outside, Wisconsin goes about its day. Cars idle at stoplights. Snowmelt drips from gutters. Somewhere, the man whose DNA has just spoken for him pours a cup of coffee, unaware that the past is moving toward him with purpose. The file is reopened fully, not just as a cold case, but as an active homicide investigation, and that distinction changes everything. Old reports are no longer relics. They are evidence again. Witness statements, once dismissed as unreliable, are reread with new context. A neighbor who mentioned a strange vehicle. A coworker who recalled a tense argument. A bar receipt with a timestamp that never quite fit the timeline. Details that once felt insignificant now glow faintly, waiting to be examined under a new light. Investigators reconstruct the night of the murder minute by minute, hour by hour, overlaying the suspect's known movements with the victim's last known path, watching the 2 lines draw closer, then intersect. They dig into the suspect's past with a thoroughness that borders on invasive, because this is the cost of truth. Employment records, old addresses, traffic stops, any brush with law enforcement, no matter how minor. Patterns begin to emerge, subtle at first. Short stays in certain neighborhoods. Jobs that required late hours, travel, access. A reputation for volatility that never quite crossed the threshold into criminality. People remember him as intense, sometimes charming, sometimes unsettling, the kind of man you didn't quite trust, but couldn't point to a reason why. Memory is unreliable, investigators know that, but when enough people describe the same unease, it starts to matter. The victim's life is reconstructed alongside his, not as a counterpoint, but as a reminder of what was taken. Photographs surface, scanned and enlarged, showing her smiling in sunlight, hair caught by the wind, eyes bright with the unguarded confidence of youth. Friends are contacted again, voices older now, grief dulled but not gone. They talk about plans that never happened, about jokes that still land too hard, about the way the town felt after her death, like everyone was holding their breath for years. The family is approached carefully, with warnings that new information has emerged, that nothing is certain yet, that hope must be tempered. They listen in silence, hands clasped, because they have learned how dangerous hope can be. Behind the scenes, prosecutors are brought in early, their questions sharp and relentless. DNA is powerful, but it is not enough on its own, not after 30 years, not when defense attorneys will argue contamination, coincidence, incomplete records. Every step must be documented, every decision justified. Investigators are asked to prove not just that the DNA matches, but that the suspect had opportunity. Motive means. They return to the crime scene, now altered by time, trees taller, paths rerouted, but still carrying echoes. They use maps, aerial photographs, old survey data to show how someone familiar with the area could have moved unseen, how a car could have been parked without drawing attention, how the woods that seemed so peaceful in daylight could swallow sound at night. The lab work continues, refining the profile, confirming results, eliminating any chance of error. Independent tests are run. External experts are consulted. The numbers come back the same every time. The DNA does not waver. It is patient, indifferent to doubt, a silent witness that waited 3 decades to be heard. Investigators feel the pressure building now, not just from within the department, but from the knowledge that once this becomes public, the scrutiny will be relentless. Media requests will flood in. Armchair detectives will dissect every detail. The town will be forced to confront the idea that someone among them, someone they may have known, lived, worked, raised children perhaps, carried this secret all along. Surveillance intensifies. The suspect's routines are mapped. When he leaves the house, where he shops,
Who he talks to.
nothing dramatic, nothing that would alert him. Just observation, patience, the quiet work of law enforcement at its most methodical. They watch him laugh with neighbors, shake hands at community events, live the life he was never supposed to have. Some investigators feel a flicker of anger at that, at the unfairness of it, but they bury it. Emotion clouds judgment, and judgment is all that matters now. There are moments of doubt, too, because there always are. What if there is an explanation they haven't seen? What if the DNA tells only part of the story? Cold cases are graveyards of certainty, filled with theories that once felt solid and later crumbled. The team checks each other constantly, challenging assumptions, playing devil's advocate because the stakes are too high for complacency. They revisit alternate suspects, rule them out definitively, close doors that were once left ajar. The case narrows, tightens, focuses, until there is no room left to hide. The decision to arrest is not taken lightly. It comes after meetings that stretch late into the night, after stacks of documents are reviewed and re-reviewed, after everyone in the room has had a chance to voice concerns. When the green light finally comes, it feels less like triumph and more like inevitability. Warrants are prepared. Teams are assigned. Protocols are rehearsed. The goal is a clean arrest, no spectacle, no risk, because after 30 years, the truth deserves precision, not chaos. And still, the town sleeps, unaware that its oldest wound is about to be reopened. Snow begins to fall again, softening edges, muting sound, as if the world itself is trying to cushion what comes next. Somewhere, the suspect goes to bed, locks his door, sets his alarm, secure in habits built over decades. He does not know that his DNA has already spoken, that the future has already shifted, that the morning will bring a knock he cannot ignore. For the investigators, there is no rest now. They replay the arrest plan in their minds. Imagine the moment of confrontation, the look on his face when he realizes the past is no longer buried. Will he deny it? Will he confess? Will he say nothing at all? They have learned not to predict human behavior, only to prepare for it. The only certainty is that once the handcuffs close, once the words "you are under arrest" are spoken, the case will move from shadows into light, and with that light will come answers that have been delayed for far too long. The victim's name is written on a whiteboard in the briefing room, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. This is why they are here. This is who matters. 30 years ago, her life ended in violence and fear. Today, the machinery of justice, slow and imperfect, has finally caught up. The past has been patient. Now it is relentless. The knock comes just after dawn, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of a Wisconsin morning that looks no different from any other, pale light filtering through bare branches, frost clinging to mailboxes, the world holding its breath. Inside the house, footsteps approach the door, slow, unhurried, the sound of a man who believes he has nothing to fear. When the door opens, the past steps forward in the form of badges and carefully spoken words, and in that instant, something changes in his eyes. Surprise first, then calculation, then a flash of something older, buried deep, before the mask settles back into place. He listens as the warrant is read, as the reason is stated, as decades collapse into a single sentence. DNA evidence. A homicide from 30 years ago. The words hang in the cold air, heavy, undeniable. The arrest is calm, almost mundane, hands placed behind his back, cuffs clicking shut with a sound that echoes louder than it should. Neighbors peek through curtains, sensing drama, without understanding it yet. No one shouts. No one resists. The suspect says little, asks no questions, his face carefully neutral as he is guided toward the waiting vehicle. Investigators watch closely, cataloging every reaction, every microexpression, because even now, behavior matters. Inside the car, as the door closes, The world he has known for decades seals itself off, and the long, quiet drive begins. At the station, the atmosphere tightens. Word spreads quickly through the building, officers stopping mid-task, glancing toward the interview rooms, aware that history is unfolding a few steps away. The suspect is processed, fingerprints taken again, photographs updated, a ritual repeated countless times for countless people, yet weighted here with extraordinary significance. 30 years ago, these same steps failed to bring justice. Today, they feel different, charged with the knowledge that science has shifted the balance. The interview room is small, deliberately so, walls bare, table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs facing each other under harsh fluorescent light. When the investigators enter, they carry not just questions, but decades of silence, unanswered grief, and the certainty of a DNA match that cannot be argued away. They introduce themselves, voices steady, professional. He nods, polite, even cordial, as if this were a routine conversation. The recorder clicks on, its red light glowing like an unblinking eye. They start slow, building rapport, talking about neutral topics, his life now, his work, his family. He answers easily, practiced in conversation, revealing nothing of what he might be feeling beneath the surface. Then, gradually, they begin to shift, steering the discussion toward the past, toward the year everyone in this room knows by heart. He stiffens almost imperceptibly. A pause before answering. A change in cadence. Small things, but investigators live for small things. They ask about where he lived back then, who he knew, what he remembers of the town at that time. He claims memory fades, that it was a long time ago, that he was busy with his own life. They let him talk, let him build his narrative, because narratives reveal cracks. When the victim's name is finally spoken, there is a flicker, a tightening of the jaw, gone in a heartbeat. He says he didn't know her, never met her, just another tragedy from another time. That's when the DNA comes into play, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Calmly, methodically, they explain how evidence preserved for decades was re-examined, how new technology allowed a profile to be built, how that profile led them here. They watch him closely as they speak, noting the way his eyes drop to the table, the way his fingers curl slightly against his leg. He does not explode. He does not confess. He leans back, exhales slowly, and says nothing. Silence stretches. The recorder hums softly. Investigators resist the urge to fill the void, knowing that silence can be a powerful tool. Eventually, he speaks, questioning the science, suggesting mistakes, contamination, coincidence. It is a defense rehearsed in the abstract, not yet sharpened by legal counsel, but familiar all the same. They respond with specifics, dates, procedures, chain of custody, each answer tightening the net. The room feels smaller with every exchange. Hours pass. Breaks are taken. Water is offered. Rights are reiterated. The suspect remains composed, but the strain is visible now, shoulders slumped slightly, voice less confident. He repeats his denial, clinging to it as if repetition might make it true. Investigators know better than to push for a confession at any cost. They are not here for drama. They are here for truth that will stand in court. As the interview concludes, the suspect is led away to a holding cell, and the room exhales. Investigators step out, rub tired eyes, exchange glances that carry a mix of relief and apprehension. The arrest was only the beginning. Now comes the hard part, building a case that can survive the harsh light of trial, that can convince 12 strangers of what science and persistence have already revealed. News breaks quickly, despite efforts to control the narrative. A press release confirms the arrest in a decades-old cold case. No names yet, just enough information to ignite speculation. Phones light up. Social media fills with shock, disbelief, relief. For some in the community, it feels like a wound reopening. For others, like a weight lifting. People remember where they were when the murder happened, how it changed the way they locked their doors, watched their children, trusted their neighbors. Now they remember again. The victim's family is informed personally, investigators sitting with them, explaining what has happened, what comes next. There are tears, of course, and questions that have waited 30 years to be asked. Why now? Why him? What will happen next? The answers are careful, honest, grounded in process. Justice, they explain, is not a moment. It is a path, and they are only at the beginning. As night falls, the suspect sits alone, staring at concrete walls, confronted at last by a past he believed buried. Outside, the town hums with uneasy energy, a community forced to reconcile memory with reality. The case that once haunted Wisconsin in whispers is now spoken aloud, its secrets dragged into the open. And somewhere between the certainty of DNA and the uncertainty of human truth, the story moves forward, irreversible, relentless, demanding to be finished. By the time the sun rises again, the story has already begun to mutate, shaped by rumor, memory, and the uneasy need for closure. In coffee shops and break rooms, people speak in lowered voices, replaying the same questions that have lingered for 3 decades. How could it have been him? How did no one see it? How did it take so long? The arrest has cracked the surface, but beneath it lies a sediment of doubt and disbelief, layers of lives lived alongside a man now redefined by a single act from a distant year. Inside the evidence room, the past is laid out with clinical precision. Boxes pulled from shelves carry labels yellowed with age, handwritten notes from investigators long retired, some long gone. Each item is handled with reverence, gloved hands lifting, cataloging, re-examining. Fibers once dismissed as insignificant are photographed anew. Old photographs are scanned at higher resolution, details emerging that were invisible before. A footprint impression, blurred in the original report, now shows a pattern that sparks quiet discussion. Nothing is assumed. Everything is questioned. The DNA evidence sits at the center of it all, a small, unassuming sample that has reshaped the case. Analysts walk prosecutors through the science, explaining allele matches, statistical probabilities, margins so narrow they approach impossibility. They speak in numbers and charts, but beneath the data is a simple truth. This biological signature links the suspect to the victim in a way no alibi can erase. The room listens intently, knowing defense attorneys will attack every step, every method, every assumption. The science must be airtight. Meanwhile, detectives retrace old steps, knocking on doors they last visited when they were younger, less cautious, more desperate. Some witnesses remember everything with startling clarity, voices trembling as they recount the night that changed the town. Others struggle, memories blurred by time, trauma, and the desire to forget. A few are no longer alive, their untold stories leaving gaps that can never be filled. Investigators note each absence, each silence, aware that time is both ally and enemy. The suspect's past is dissected with renewed urgency. Old employment records surface, placing him closer to the scene than he once admitted. Former acquaintances are interviewed, some reluctantly, others eager to talk now that the unthinkable has happened. Small details emerge, a sudden move, a relationship that ended abruptly, a temper remembered but never reported. None of it proves guilt alone, but together, it forms a mosaic that sharpens the picture. In the jail, the suspect meets with an attorney for the first time. The bravado fades. Legal language replaces denial, strategy replacing confidence. They discuss options, defenses, the weight of DNA in modern courtrooms. He listens, nods, asks measured questions, but when the conversation pauses, his gaze drifts, as if pulled backward through time. Whatever happened in that year has returned, uninvited, unavoidable. Prosecutors begin to shape the narrative they will one day present to a jury. They know this is more than a case. It is a reckoning. They consider how to explain decades of delay without undermining confidence, how to honor the victim without exploiting her memory. Every word matters. Every exhibit must speak clearly, persuasively, without exaggeration. Justice delayed is fragile, and they intend to handle it with care. Outside the courthouse, candles appear at a makeshift memorial, photographs tucked into jars, flowers laid by hands that tremble slightly in the cold. Strangers stand together in silence, sharing a grief that once fractured them and now draws them close again. Some weep openly. Others stare ahead, Jaws set, eyes dry. The arrest has not healed the wound, but it has acknowledged it, and for many, that is a beginning. As night deepens, the town settles uneasily, aware that the story is far from over. The arrest was a shock, the DNA a revelation, but truth is not yet complete. It waits in testimony still to be given, in evidence still to be weighed, in a courtroom where the past will be spoken aloud, line by line. And until that day comes, the case hovers over the community, a reminder that time can bury many things, but it cannot erase them. The days that follow blur into a relentless rhythm of preparation, each hour tightening the vice around a story that refuses to stay buried. In offices lit long after sunset, investigators and prosecutors sit shoulder to shoulder, poring over transcripts, timelines, and photographs that feel both ancient and immediate. Coffee goes cold on desks. Pens run out of ink. Every detail is questioned, every assumption challenged, because this case has waited too long for mistakes. The defense begins to move, quietly at first, filing motions that question the handling of evidence, the integrity of storage, the possibility of contamination. They speak the language of doubt with practiced ease, planting seeds that will later be nurtured in front of a jury. The prosecution anticipates it all, responding with documentation, expert affidavits, meticulous logs that trace the DNA sample's journey through decades of custody. It becomes a battle not just of facts, but of trust. Detectives return again to the crime scene, now transformed by time. Where there was once an open field, there are houses. Where darkness once swallowed sound, streetlights hum softly. They stand quietly, imagining the night as it was, stripping away the present to reconstruct the past. Measurements are taken again. Sight lines tested. Distances walked. The physical world offers its own testimony, unchanged in its fundamentals, even as everything else has shifted. New witnesses come forward, emboldened by the arrest, by the sudden legitimacy of long-held suspicions. A former coworker recalls an offhand comment that once seemed meaningless. A neighbor remembers a car parked where it shouldn't have been. Each account is fragile, filtered through years of memory, but investigators listen carefully, weighing consistency, corroboration, motive. Truth rarely arrives clean. It must be assembled. In the jail, the suspect's routine hardens into monotony. Meals slid through a slot. Count times announced over loudspeakers. Nights spent staring at a ceiling scarred by the marks of others who waited here before him. He speaks little now, saving his words for his attorney, conserving energy for what lies ahead. But sometimes, in the quiet, something breaks through. A sigh held too long. A fist clenched, without realizing it. The past is loud in places like this. The victim's family moves through their own gauntlet. Media requests pile up. Well-meaning strangers offer condolences that reopen wounds. They wrestle with conflicting emotions, relief that the case is moved, anger that it took so long, fear of what a trial will dredge up. They revisit memories of a life interrupted, sorting photographs, letters, fragments of a person who exists now mostly in recollection. Justice feels close, but not yet real. Court dates are set. The calendar fills with deadlines. Pretrial hearings loom, each one a skirmish that could shape the outcome. Lawyers rehearse arguments in empty courtrooms, voices echoing off wooden benches. They imagine the jury's faces, the questions they might ask, the doubts they must erase. This is where the story will be told, not in whispers or headlines, but under oath. As the first hearing approaches, tension settles over the town like a low fog. People drive past the courthouse more slowly, glancing at its stone facade as if it might speak. Old conversations resurface. Old fears, too. The idea that a killer lived among them for decades is hard to reconcile with the ordinariness of daily life. It forces a reckoning not just with one man's actions, but with the blind spots of an entire community. On the eve of that hearing, files are stacked neatly for the first time in weeks. The evidence is ready. The arguments are sharpened. There is nothing left to do but step forward. Somewhere between the cold certainty of DNA and the fragile unpredictability of human judgment, the case waits, poised to move from investigation into history, carrying with it the weight of 30 years and the promise, however tentative, of truth finally spoken aloud. The morning of the hearing arrives without ceremony, a gray Wisconsin sky pressing low over the courthouse, as if the weather itself understands the gravity of what is about to happen. Reporters gather early, cameras pointed at the entrance long before the doors unlock, rehearsing stand-ups that will compress decades of waiting into a few urgent sentences. Inside, security checks bags and pockets with mechanical precision, every routine motion underscored by the awareness that this is no ordinary docket item. This is a cold case. This is a reckoning. The courtroom fills slowly. Wooden benches creak under shifting weight. Murmurs ripple and then fade as the bailiff calls for order. When the defendant is brought in, the air changes, subtle but unmistakable. Heads tilt forward. Eyes narrow. Some people search his face for something, remorse, recognition, monstrosity, but find only the flat neutrality of a man who knows he is being watched. He takes his seat, hands folded, posture rehearsed, as if calm itself might serve as a defense. The judge enters. The room rises, then settles again. Formalities follow, each one familiar, each one now charged with consequence. The prosecution speaks first, outlining the scope of the evidence, careful not to overreach, careful not to dramatize what they believe will speak for itself. They talk about preservation, about advances in forensic science, about a DNA profile that waited patiently through technological eras until the tools existed to interpret it. Their words are measured, but the implication is explosive. The past has been decoded. The defense responds with restraint that borders on confidence. They acknowledge the power of DNA, then pivot, questioning context, chain of custody, interpretation. They remind the court that science is conducted by humans and humans err. They suggest that decades-old evidence carries decades-old vulnerabilities. It is a performance calibrated to plant doubt, not to win today, but to begin shaping the battlefield ahead. As arguments unfold, the victim's family listens in silence. Each legal phrase lands differently for them, stripped of abstraction. When someone says the night of the incident, they hear a door that never opened again. When someone says the remains, they see a face frozen in time. They sit still, hands clasped, absorbing every word because this is the closest they have ever been to answers spoken out loud in a room that matters. The judge rules on preliminary motions, allowing key evidence to move forward. It is not a verdict, not even close, but it feels like momentum, a current, something irreversible. Outside the courtroom, phones light up as news spreads. Headlines begin to form in real time, language sharpened to capture attention without losing accuracy. DNA evidence upheld. Cold case advances. Each update sends a pulse through the community. In the days that follow, preparation intensifies. Expert witnesses are finalized. Forensic analysts rehearse how to explain complex processes to people with no scientific background. They practice analogies, refine charts, simplify language, without sacrificing precision. Somewhere between jargon and storytelling, they must make certainty understandable. Detectives revisit interviews from years ago, listening again with new ears. Statements that once felt inconclusive now align differently. Pauses linger longer. Word choices stand out. They realize how perspective reshapes memory, how knowing the end changes the meaning of the beginning. It is unsettling, this retroactive clarity, and they guard against it carefully, knowing the defense will challenge every inference. The suspect's past is examined under a microscope. Employment records, relationships, moves between towns. Patterns that once looked random now appear connected, though investigators remain cautious. Correlation is not confession. They build only what they can prove, brick by brick, resisting the temptation to let the narrative outrun the evidence. At night, the town hums with quiet speculation. In diners and living rooms, people speak in lowered voices, replaying what they know, what they think they know, what they wish they had noticed sooner. Some feel guilt. Others feel vindication. Many feel both. The idea that time protected someone who should have been stopped sooner is hard to sit with. It forces uncomfortable questions about how evil can hide in plain sight. As the trial date approaches, the case becomes less about the science and more about belief, about whether a jury will trust what technology says over what memory cannot provide, about whether justice delayed can still feel like justice at all. The machinery is in motion now, heavy and deliberate, carrying with it the accumulated weight of 30 years, rolling inexorably toward a moment when the truth will no longer live in files and whispers, but in a verdict spoken aloud, impossible to take back. The trial opens with a tension that feels physical, a low-frequency hum vibrating beneath every movement in the room. Jurors file in, ordinary people carrying notebooks and expectations they didn't ask for, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They take their seats knowing that for the next stretch of days, they will become the final audience to a story that has waited decades to be told properly. The clerk reads the charges. The words are plain, procedural, but they land like blows. Murder. The syllables echo, heavy and irreversible. Opening statements begin, and the prosecution chooses not to shout. They choose gravity. They speak of a winter night long past, of a young life interrupted, of evidence that outlived fear, outlived neglect, outlived the limitations of its time. They describe how DNA does not forget, how it waits in silence, how it carries truth forward even when humans cannot. Their voice is steady, deliberate, building a sense that this case is not about spectacle, but about inevitability. The defense follows with a cooler tone, measured skepticism wrapped in civility. They warn the jury about the seduction of certainty, about the danger of believing that science is infallible simply because it wears a lab coat. They remind them that 30 years is a long time for evidence to sit, to degrade, to be mishandled, to be misunderstood. They do not deny the tragedy. They question the conclusion. Doubt is their currency, and they spend it carefully. The first witnesses are called. Detectives, current and retired, take the stand and trace the investigation's long arc. They describe the early days, the chaos, the lack of resources, the way tips poured in faster than they could be verified. They speak of mistakes without dramatizing them, acknowledging misleads, false assumptions, dead ends. Their candor is strategic. It humanizes the process, frames the failures as limitations rather than negligence. Then the forensic experts testify, and the courtroom shifts again. Screens light up with charts and graphs, sequences of colored bars representing genetic markers. The experts explain extraction, amplification, comparison. They break down probabilities, ratios so small they sound theoretical, yet concrete enough to carry weight. They explain how contamination is prevented, how controls are used, how conclusions are peer-reviewed. Each answer is crisp, precise, designed to withstand cross-examination. The defense presses hard. They question storage conditions. They question documentation. They question whether a single profile can truly define guilt. The experts respond with patience, returning again and again to methodology, to standards, to replication. The exchange is technical, intense, and for the jurors, mentally exhausting. They scribble notes, glance at exhibits, try to hold the complexity together in their minds. When the victim's relatives take the stand, the room tightens. They speak softly, haltingly about absence, about birthdays that stopped being celebrated, about holidays that became rituals of endurance rather than joy. Their testimony is not evidence in the scientific sense, but it changes the atmosphere. It reminds everyone that this is not an abstract debate about data. It is about a chair that has remained empty for 30 years. The defendant does not look at them. His gaze stays fixed on the table, jaw clenched, expression unreadable. Some jurors notice. Others deliberately do not. Everyone is aware that every movement is being interpreted, that stillness itself can become a statement. As days pass, patterns emerge. The prosecution's case is methodical, almost relentless in its calm. The defense introduces alternative explanations, hypothetical scenarios meant to loosen the grip of certainty. They suggest transfer, coincidence, contamination. They point to the absence of eyewitnesses, the lack of a confession. They argue that the state is asking the jury to bridge gaps with faith in technology rather than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury listens. They watch. They weigh. In the evenings, they go home under strict instructions not to discuss what they've heard, carrying fragments of testimony like static in their heads. Sleep comes unevenly. Dreams are restless. The responsibility settles deeper with each passing hour. Outside, the community remains transfixed. News segments recap the day's proceedings, soundbites stripped of nuance, headlines sharpened for impact. Social media churns with opinions, theories, declarations of guilt and innocence delivered with confidence that contrasts sharply with a careful deliberation unfolding inside the courtroom. The divide between spectacle and substance widens. Midway through the trial, a moment lands harder than expected. A forensic analyst revisits a single detail, a small irregularity in the original evidence log that once raised questions but now, with context, resolves them. The explanation is simple, almost mundane, but it closes a door the defense had hoped to keep ajar. The prosecution doesn't celebrate. They let the silence do the work. When the state rests its case, there is a collective exhale. The defense begins its presentation with renewed energy, calling its own experts, introducing uncertainty wherever possible. They are persuasive, articulate, skilled at framing possibilities. They do not need to prove an alternate story. They only need to suggest one. As the final witness steps down, the courtroom feels drained, saturated with information and emotion. Closing arguments loom, and with them, the realization that soon the narrative will no longer belong to lawyers or experts or journalists. It will belong to 12 people who must decide whether the voice of science, echoing across 3 decades, is loud enough to drown out doubt, or whether the passage of time has blurred the truth beyond recovery. Closing arguments arrive like the final compression of a storm system, pressure building, air heavy, every sound sharper than it was before. The prosecution stands first, stepping into the space with the confidence of a narrative that believes it has earned its ending. They do not rush. They revisit the timeline without repeating it, letting key moments surface naturally: the winter night, the evidence collected with imperfect tools but preserved with intention, the decades of silence, the moment technology finally caught up. They speak of patience, of truth that does not decay, of science not as a miracle, but as a witness that cannot be intimidated or bribed. Their voice lowers when they describe the victim, rises slightly when they describe the match, then settles into a steady cadence as they ask the jurors to consider what coincidence really means when probabilities shrink to near impossibility. They remind the jury that doubt must be reasonable, not imaginary, not manufactured to soothe discomfort. They point to the consistency of the data, the corroboration between independent tests, the absence of any credible alternative explanation that fits the facts without contortion. They do not demonize the defendant. They do not need to. Instead, they frame the case as a convergence, a long arc bending slowly but inevitably toward this room, this moment, these 12 people. When they finish, they return to their seat without drama, the echo of their words lingering in the air like a held breath. The defense rises with a different energy, sharper, more kinetic, aware that their task is to interrupt inevitability. They begin by acknowledging the emotional weight in the room, then pivot quickly, cautioning against letting emotion masquerade as proof. They challenge the jury to remember that certainty is comforting, but comfort is not the standard. They emphasize gaps, the years when evidence sat untouched, the people who were never questioned, the possibility that the story being told now is cleaner than reality ever was. They speak of science as a tool wielded by humans, subject to human error, human bias, human assumption. They ask pointed questions that do not require answers aloud. Why now? Why this suspect? Why should a single strand of genetic material outweigh the absence of eyewitnesses, the lack of contemporaneous corroboration? Their tone sharpens when they describe the danger of retrospective certainty, of fitting conclusions to data rather than the other way around. They urge the jurors to protect the principle that time should not lower the bar for proof. When they conclude, their final words hang deliberately unfinished, an invitation for doubt to take root. The judge instructs the jury, Voice measured, language precise. Burden of proof. Reasonable doubt. Evaluation of expert testimony. No outside influence. No speculation beyond evidence. The words are familiar, but today they carry unusual gravity. Then the jury files out, notebooks in hand, faces set with the seriousness of people about to do something that cannot be undone. The deliberation room is quieter than expected at first. Chairs scrape softly. Papers shuffle. Someone pours water. For a moment, no one speaks, as if acknowledging that whatever is said first will tilt the room. When the conversation begins, it does so cautiously. They review instructions. They agree on process. They decide to start with the evidence, not opinions. The DNA analysis becomes the focal point almost immediately. Jurors ask clarifying questions of one another, reconstructing testimony from memory and notes. They discuss probabilities, error rates, safeguards. Some are convinced. Others are uneasy. The discussion deepens, becomes more technical, more nuanced. They debate what constitutes reasonable doubt in a case where technology has advanced faster than collective intuition. As hours pass, voices grow more confident. Positions emerge. Not rigid camps, but tendencies. A few jurors express strong belief in the prosecution's case, citing the convergence of independent tests and expert consensus. Others remain cautious, troubled by the absence of contextual evidence, by the long silence between crime and arrest. They return repeatedly to the question of transfer, of how DNA might appear without implying guilt. Each scenario is examined, stress-tested, weighed against likelihood. They take breaks, stretch, stare out the window at a world continuing unaware. When they reconvene, the conversation shifts to the human elements. The victim's family, the defendant's demeanor, the weight of finally answering a question that has hovered for decades. Someone reminds the group that sympathy cannot substitute for proof. Someone else counters that ignoring impact does not make the decision more just. The balance is delicate, constantly renegotiated. A preliminary vote is taken, not binding, just a temperature check. The results are close enough to demand more discussion.
No one is surprised.
The room settles into a rhythm of argument and reflection, voices rising, then softening, then rising again. Evidence is re-examined. Testimony is recalled. The instructions are reread aloud. Night falls. They order food. Fatigue sets in, but no one suggests stopping. There is a sense that momentum matters, that clarity might be lost if they pause too long. Gradually, something shifts. Not a dramatic reversal, but an accumulation. Doubts are addressed, not erased, but contextualized. Hypotheses are tested against the record and found wanting. The improbability of coincidence begins to outweigh the discomfort of certainty. Another vote is taken. The margin widens. Discussion continues, focused now on ensuring that everyone understands and accepts the reasoning, not just the conclusion. The final holdouts articulate their remaining concerns, and the group responds carefully, methodically. No one pressures. No one dismisses. When the last juror nods, it is not triumph but resignation mixed with resolve. They notify the bailiff. The courtroom fills again, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. The defendant stands. The victim's family grips each other's hands. The jury files in, faces composed, unreadable. The clerk asks the foreperson to rise. The verdict is read.
Guilty.
The word lands with a dull finality, less explosive than expected, heavier. A quiet gasp ripples through the gallery. The defendant exhales sharply, shoulders sagging, as if a weight has finally settled where it has always belonged. The victim's family weeps, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the exhausted release of people who have been holding something in for far too long. The judge thanks the jury, dismisses them with solemn acknowledgement of their service. Sentencing is scheduled. The room slowly empties, conversations hushed, movements deliberate. Outside, cameras wait, microphones poised, ready to condense complexity into headlines. Inside, the air still vibrates with what has just happened. In the days that follow, the community reacts in waves. Relief, anger, skepticism, gratitude. Old arguments resurface. New ones begin. The case becomes a reference point, cited in discussions about cold cases, about DNA, about justice delayed and justice delivered. The victim's name is spoken again, this time with context, with closure that is partial but real. For investigators, there is satisfaction tempered by reflection. They review the case, note what was missed, what was preserved, what could have been done differently. They understand that this outcome does not rewrite the past, does not restore what was lost. It answers one question and raises others about how many similar truths are still waiting, silent, in storage rooms and databases. For the defendant, the future narrows abruptly. Appeals are discussed. Statements are issued. The narrative shifts from mystery to consequence. The long anonymity ends, replaced by a different kind of visibility, one defined by a single act and the proof that finally caught up to it. And for the jurors, life resumes, outwardly unchanged. They return to jobs, families, routines. But something remains with them, an awareness of how fragile certainty can be, how heavy responsibility feels when it is real, how a single decision can reverberate backward across decades. They carry the knowledge that they were the final link in a chain that began on a cold night long ago, and that their verdict, for better or worse, has closed a door that stood open for 30 years, leaving behind not silence, but a complicated, enduring echo. The aftermath does not arrive all at once. It seeps in, slow and relentless, filling every crack the verdict left behind. In the days immediately following the announcement, the courthouse becomes a magnet for voices that were silent for decades, reporters revisiting yellowed notes, former detectives surfacing from retirement with memories sharpened by vindication and regret, neighbors who once whispered now speaking openly as if the ruling has granted permission to remember out loud. The case is no longer frozen in time. It is fluid again, moving through conversations, headlines, court filings, late-night broadcasts that replay the same phrases until they lose their edges. Cold case. 30 years. DNA breakthrough. Justice at last. Each repetition reshapes the story, sanding down complexity, amplifying certain moments while others fade back into shadow. Inside the prosecutor's office, there is no celebration, only a quiet reckoning. Files are reorganized, evidence logs reviewed, procedures scrutinized with a new intensity. The wind feels heavy because it is inseparable from the question that follows every solved cold case. Why did it take so long? They revisit the early missteps, the limitations of the era, the assumptions that guided decisions before science could challenge them. No one says it aloud, but everyone feels it, the understanding that technology did not fail the victim. People did, constrained by what they knew and what they believed at the time. The verdict validates the work done now, but it also illuminates the cost of what was not done then. For the defense team, the case does not end with the word guilty. Strategy shifts immediately, attention turning to transcripts, jury instructions, expert testimony. They dissect every moment for potential error, every ruling for grounds to appeal. Publicly, they speak of disappointment, of respect for the process paired with concern about its outcome. Privately, they wrestle with the same unease that follows any conviction built on evidence that did not exist at the time of the crime. They know the argument that will define the next phase, whether justice delayed can still be justice if the delay itself reshaped the path to truth. The victim's family retreats from the spotlight, seeking something resembling peace. Closure, they discover, is not a single emotion but a collage of conflicting ones. Relief mixes with grief sharpened by clarity, anger finds new targets, memories resurface uninvited. They visit the grave, speak words they have rehearsed for years, words that feel both necessary and insufficient. The verdict does not give them back the years stolen by uncertainty, but it does change the shape of their loss. The question mark that haunted every anniversary, every holiday, every quiet moment is replaced by a period, firm and unyielding. It is not comfort, but it is an ending. The community processes the outcome in its own fragmented way. Some embrace the result as proof that persistence matters, that patience and progress can align. Others remain skeptical, uneasy with the idea that a life can be appended decades later by a microscopic trace. Talk radio debates rage, social media threads spiral, armchair analysts argue probabilities and principles with equal fervor. The case becomes symbolic, a stand-in for broader fears and hopes about surveillance, science, and the reach of the state. It forces an uncomfortable conversation about whether time should protect the guilty or empower the truth. Meanwhile, laboratories across the state feel the ripple effect. Funding proposals reference the case explicitly, citing it as evidence of DNA's transformative power. Cold case units receive renewed attention, dusty boxes pulled from storage as technicians reassess what might now be possible. Every old sample carries new potential, every sealed envelope a question waiting to be reopened. The solved case is no longer singular. It is contagious, inspiring both optimism and pressure. Families of other victims call, asking if their loved one's case might be next, if science can finally hear what silence concealed. The investigators who brought the case back to life find themselves in an unfamiliar role, part professionals, part symbols. They are invited to speak at conferences, to consult on other dormant files, to explain not just how they solved it, but why they refused to let it go. When asked what kept them pushing forward, their answers are practical, almost mundane. The evidence was there. The science improved. The timing was right. But beneath those words is a deeper truth, one harder to articulate, about responsibility and resolve, about the refusal to accept that some questions should remain unanswered simply because time has passed. The defendant, now formally convicted, is transferred to a different reality. Processing replaces speculation. Routine replaces uncertainty. In statements issued through counsel, there is insistence, denial, an appeal to doubt that persists despite the verdict. Friends and family speak on his behalf, describing a man they knew, a life that will now be defined by a single act and the proof that tied him to it. Others distance themselves, unwilling or unable to reconcile past familiarity with present guilt. The fracture lines spread outward, touching lives that once intersected casually, now permanently altered. As sentencing approaches, the narrative tightens again. Victim impact statements are prepared, each word weighed for its power to convey decades of absence in minutes. The court sets a date, and anticipation builds once more, though this time the uncertainty is different. The question is no longer who did it, but how the system will respond now that it knows. Maximum penalties are discussed, mitigating factors debated. The law moves deliberately, aware that its final act must balance retribution, deterrence, and the reality of time already past. The day of sentencing arrives with less spectacle but equal gravity. The courtroom is quieter, the audience smaller, the atmosphere heavy with finality. The judge listens, impassive, as the past is narrated once more, this time not to prove guilt, but to measure consequence. When the sentence is delivered, it feels less like a revelation and more like a confirmation, the last piece snapping into place. There is no applause, no audible reaction, only a collective exhale as the process reaches its formal conclusion. Yet, even now, the case refuses to fully settle. Academics write papers analyzing the implications, ethicists debate the moral contours, legal scholars examine precedents set and boundaries tested. The story continues to evolve, not as a mystery but as a lesson, one that resists simplification. It challenges the notion that justice has an expiration date, while also forcing recognition of the damage time inflicts on memory, evidence, and lives. In quiet moments, those closest to the case reflect on what remains unresolved. Not in terms of guilt, but in terms of meaning. What does it say about a society that can wait 30 years to hear the truth? What obligations do we carry to the past, to victims whose voices faded before technology could amplify them? The answers are not found in verdicts or sentences, but in the choices made afterward, in whether the momentum sparked by one solved case is sustained or allowed to dissipate. The file is eventually archived again, this time with an ending, but it is no longer dormant. It lives on in training manuals, in policy discussions, in the collective memory of a community that learned how close the past can be, how quietly it waits. The case that once symbolized failure becomes a benchmark for persistence, a reminder that truth does not vanish when ignored. It accumulates, patient and unyielding, until the moment arrives when it can finally be seen, and once seen, cannot be undone. Time behaves strangely once a case is reopened. It accelerates and stalls at the same time, weeks collapsing into hours, while single moments stretch endlessly under scrutiny. When investigators announce that DNA has produced a viable suspect after 3 decades, the calendar seems to fold in on itself. The past is no longer distant. It presses against the present with startling force. Old evidence bags are pulled from shelves, their labels faded, handwriting from another era staring back like a foreign language. Every item is handled with reverence now, not because it is new, but because it survived long enough to matter again. The suspect's name moves through channels slowly at first, confined to conference rooms and sealed documents. Even within the department, access is limited, conversation careful. There is an unspoken fear of contamination, not of evidence this time, but of expectation. After 30 years, no one wants to speak the wrong certainty into existence. Detectives review the chain of custody repeatedly, tracing the journey of a single biological trace from a chaotic crime scene to a sterile lab bench decades later. Each signature, each date, each transfer becomes a lifeline. If one link breaks, the entire narrative could collapse. Outside those walls, the world senses a shift without fully understanding it. Reporters catch fragments, phrases leaked just enough to ignite speculation. Social media hums with revived interest, amateur sleuths resurrecting theories long dismissed, timelines reconstructed with modern eyes. The victim's photograph circulates again, no longer grainy nostalgia, but a face reintroduced to an audience that never knew her. Comments fill with shock, with sympathy, with the same question repeated endlessly in different forms. How could this have gone unsolved for so long? The investigative team moves forward methodically, aware that speed now is less important than precision. They map the suspect's life backward, year by year, placing him in proximity to the crime not just geographically, but circumstantially. Employment records, addresses, relationships, habits. Everything is cross-referenced against what little was known at the time. Patterns emerge that once seemed insignificant. A move shortly after the crime, a job that placed him near the scene, an acquaintance who remembered an offhand remark made too casually to be innocent. None of it proves anything alone, but together it forms a shape that feels disturbingly complete. Interviews resume, this time with witnesses who are older, their memories softened by time, yet sharpened by distance. Some details are gone forever, eroded by years of retelling or silence. Others resurface unexpectedly, fragments that did not fit the original narrative but now slide into place with chilling ease. A car scene parked at an odd angle, a smell that lingered, a sound dismissed as ordinary. Investigators listen without interruption, knowing that memory is fragile and suggestion is dangerous. They let the pauses stretch, allow recollection to arrive on its own terms. The suspect is approached carefully, not with accusation but with inquiry. Detectives understand the psychology of time. They know that a man who has lived freely for 30 years does not respond like one caught in the immediate aftermath of a crime. He has constructed a life layered thick enough to buffer shock. When they speak to him, they watch closely, not just for words, but for rhythm, for hesitation, for the subtle disruptions that occur when the past collides with the present. He denies involvement, expresses confusion, even indignation. His reactions are measured, practiced, as if he has long rehearsed this moment without knowing it. Behind the scenes, the lab results undergo relentless verification. Independent analysts confirm the match, statistical probabilities recalculated, margins of error examined until they are microscopic. The science must be unassailable. Investigators know the scrutiny will be merciless, that every decimal point will be challenged. DNA is powerful, but it is not infallible, and they refuse to let enthusiasm outpace rigor. Only when every safeguard is satisfied do they allow themselves to acknowledge what the numbers are saying. The probability of coincidence is vanishingly small. As the case solidifies, so does the emotional weight. Detectives feel it in quiet moments, late nights when the office empties and the file remains open on the desk. They think about the years when the victim's name gathered dust, when leads dried up and hope receded. They think about what justice means when it arrives late, about whether resolution can coexist with regret. There is no manual for this stage, no protocol for reconciling success with the knowledge that it could have come sooner. The decision to arrest is not dramatic, it is deliberate. Warrants are drafted with meticulous care, language precise, scope limited to what can be proven. The team rehearses the operation not for danger, but for dignity. They know the optics matter, that this arrest represents more than a single case. When the suspect is taken into custody, there are no flashing lights, no spectacle. Just a quiet transfer of a man from one life into another, guided by evidence that waited decades for its moment. News breaks anyway, and when it does, it detonates. Headlines compress the story into a few explosive words. Cold case solved, DNA match, arrest after 30 years. The community reacts in waves: disbelief, relief, anger, curiosity. For some, the announcement reopens wounds they thought had scarred over. For others, it validates years of unanswered questions. The victim's family receives the call they imagined countless times, and when it finally comes, it feels unreal, as if it belongs to someone else's story. In the hours that follow, the case transforms once more, shifting from investigation to prosecution. But beneath the procedural change, something more profound has occurred. The past has been acknowledged, not as a ghost, but as a fact. The silence that surrounded the crime for so long has been broken, replaced by a truth that refuses to be ignored. And as the legal process moves forward, one reality becomes impossible to deny: time did not erase the crime. It only delayed the moment when it would finally be forced into the light. The courtroom settles into a different kind of silence now, not the anticipatory hush of an opening day, but the heavy stillness that follows saturation. Everyone inside knows the story has been told in fragments already, that facts have been layered upon facts until the air itself feels dense with implication. What remains is not discovery, but reckoning. The jury returns to their seats with faces drawn tighter than before, the casual curiosity of the early days replaced by something weightier, something closer to burden. Closing arguments begin without ceremony. The prosecution stands and speaks as if the room is smaller than it is, as if each word must travel only a few feet to land exactly where it is meant to. They do not dramatize the crime. They do not raise their voice. Instead, they retrace the path of the evidence slowly, deliberately, allowing the timeline to rebuild itself in the jurors' minds. A winter night, a life cut short, biological traces left behind, unnoticed for what they truly were, waiting for technology to catch up to truth. They emphasize continuity, the unbroken thread from crime scene to laboratory to arrest. They remind the jury that DNA is not a theory, not an opinion, but a record written into the body itself. They speak about patience, about how justice does not expire simply because time passes. They acknowledge the years of silence, not as a failure of will, but as a limitation of era. Science was not ready then, they argue. Now it is. And with that readiness comes responsibility. The prosecutor's final words do not ask for sympathy. They ask for courage. The courage to trust evidence even when it arrives late. The courage to speak a verdict that cannot undo the past but can finally name it. The defense rises with a different energy, sharper, more urgent. They warn against inevitability, against the seduction of clean narratives imposed on messy histories. They dissect the prosecution's confidence piece by piece, pointing out where assumptions may have crept in, where certainty might have hardened too quickly. They remind the jury that doubt does not need to be dramatic to be reasonable. It can live in small spaces, a mislabeled sample, a forgotten protocol, a gap in documentation too easily glossed over. They urge restraint, caution, humility in the face of science that, while powerful, is still practiced by fallible humans. They speak of time as an adversary, not an ally. Memories fade. Context erodes. Evidence degrades. They ask whether a man should lose his freedom based on material that has outlived the conditions under which it was collected. Their closing is not emotional, but intellectual, designed to leave questions hanging in the air long after they sit down. Questions that cannot be easily dismissed. When the judge gives final instructions, the words are formal, measured, but their implications are enormous. Burden of proof, presumption of innocence, unanimity. The jury listens carefully, some nodding, others staring straight ahead, absorbing the gravity of what is being asked of them. Then they stand, file out, and the room exhales collectively as the door closes behind them. Deliberation begins in a sealed space far from cameras and commentary, where 12 individuals must transform information into judgment. At first, the conversation is cautious, polite. They review timelines, revisit testimony, clarify technical points. Diagrams are redrawn. Notes are compared. The DNA evidence dominates early discussion, its statistical weight hard to ignore. Some jurors speak confidently, convinced by the science. Others hesitate, circling back to procedural concerns raised by the defense. The room divides not along lines of belief, but along thresholds of certainty. Hours pass. Lunch is brought in. Voices rise, then soften. At moments, the discussion stalls completely, everyone lost in private calculation. They talk about probability, about coincidence, about what beyond a reasonable doubt truly means when the doubt itself is abstract. No one wants to be careless. No one wants to be the reason a mistake is made in either direction. As night approaches, fatigue sets in, stripping away pretense. Jurors speak more honestly now, admitting fear of getting it wrong, fear of the permanence of their decision. One juror asks aloud whether justice delayed can still be justice at all. Another counters that justice denied would be worse. The room grows quiet again, not with uncertainty, but with recognition of shared responsibility. By the second day, something shifts. The discussion narrows, focusing less on hypotheticals and more on what is actually in evidence. They re-examine the DNA analysis, the safeguards, the confirmations. They acknowledge the defense's points, but weigh them against the consistency of the scientific findings. Doubt remains, but it begins to take shape, to be measured rather than feared. One by one, positions soften, converge. Not because of persuasion, but because of accumulation. When the final vote is taken, it is unanimous. There is no celebration, no relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a decision has been reached. The foreperson knocks. The bailiff opens the door, and the jury returns to the courtroom carrying the weight of what they have agreed upon. Everyone stands. The defendant rises, face unreadable, hands clasped tightly in front of him. The verdict is read aloud, each word distinct, irreversible. Guilty. The sound is not loud, but it reverberates anyway, cutting through decades of silence with surgical precision. A collective intake of breath follows, then stillness. The victim's family reacts first, not with tears, but with a kind of stunned stillness that suggests release rather than triumph. The defendant absorbs the words without visible reaction, though something in his posture shifts, as if the air has thickened around him. The judge thanks the jury, speaks of service, of duty fulfilled. The formalities continue, but the emotional center of the room has already moved. Outside, the news spreads instantly, headlines forming in real time, compressing the complexity of the moment into declarative phrases. Cold case cracked. DNA delivers justice. For the public, the story feels complete. For those inside the courtroom, it does not. They understand that a verdict is not an ending, but a line drawn, a point of acknowledgement. It names what happened, but it cannot restore what was lost. As the courtroom empties, the echoes linger. Chairs scrape. Papers shuffle. Doors close. The space returns to neutrality, ready to host the next case, the next story. But for a brief moment, the past and present have overlapped completely, and the truth, delayed but undiminished, has finally been spoken aloud. Sentencing arrives without the spectacle that once surrounded the trial, but its gravity is heavier, more intimate. The courtroom feels smaller now, stripped of curiosity, occupied only by those who must be here because the outcome belongs to them. The judge listens as reports are summarized, as recommendations are stated in language honed to neutrality, yet every sentence carries consequence. The defendant stands again, no longer the subject of speculation but the center of a resolved truth. Time has moved him forward, aged him, changed the shape of his life, but it has not diluted the facts that brought him here. When the victim's family is invited to speak, the room tightens. Their words do not arrive as accusations. They arrive as memories, as moments interrupted and never resumed. A childhood frozen mid-sentence. A holiday table missing one chair. Years measured not by milestones but by absences. They speak of waiting without knowing they were waiting, of carrying grief that had no direction because it had no name. Their voices tremble not with anger, but with exhaustion, the kind that accumulates quietly over decades. They do not ask for vengeance. They ask for acknowledgement, for recognition that what happened mattered, that it always mattered, even when no one could prove it. The defendant is offered his chance to speak. He clears his throat, hesitates, begins, then stops. When words finally come, they are careful, constrained, shaped by counsel and circumstance. He denies intent, denies memory, denies the version of himself that the evidence has constructed. He speaks of a life lived since, of family, of work, of contributions that feel suddenly irrelevant in this room. His statement hangs awkwardly in the air, neither accepted nor challenged, simply recorded. The silence that follows is long enough to expose the limits of explanation. The judge delivers the sentence in a voice practiced at restraint. The law allows for no theatrics here, only calculation guided by statute and precedent. Years are named, conditions outlined, the future defined in terms of confinement and supervision. The sentence acknowledges the passage of time without forgiving it, recognizes age without yielding to it. When it is done, the sound of the gavel is softer than expected, but it marks a boundary that cannot be crossed back over. As the defendant is led away, the moment feels suspended, as if the room itself is uncertain how to proceed. The victim's family remains seated, hands clasped, absorbing the finality of it all. There is no applause, no outward release. Closure, it turns out, is not an explosion but a settling, a gradual acceptance that something unresolved has finally been named. They leave the courtroom slowly, carrying with them a strange combination of relief and renewed grief, because resolution does not erase loss, it reframes it. Outside, microphones wait, reporters poised to translate the proceedings into digestible statements. They ask about justice, about closure, about what this moment means after so long. The answers are careful, honest, incomplete. Justice came late, they say. Closure is complicated. What matters is that the truth was not buried forever. The cameras capture faces lined by years of waiting, eyes reflecting a future that will always include the past, but no longer be dominated by uncertainty. Within the department, the case file is finally closed. Stamps are placed, digital records updated, shelves adjusted to make room for new binders. But among the investigators who lived with this case, who reopened it, who followed its threads into the present, there is no sense of finality. They know that success here does not redeem earlier failure, does not compensate for years without answers. It simply affirms a principle they have learned to trust, that persistence matters, that evidence can outweigh ignorance, that truth does not require urgency to remain valid. The laboratory that produced the breakthrough returns to its quiet routine.
Sample arrive.
Machines hum. Analysts work under fluorescent lights, aware that within these sterile processes lie stories capable of reshaping lives. The Wisconsin case becomes a reference point, cited in training sessions, invoked as proof of what careful preservation and advancing technology can achieve. It stands as both inspiration and warning, a reminder that what is dismissed today may become decisive tomorrow. In the community, the story fades from headlines but not from memory. Conversations shift from speculation to reflection. People reconsider what they thought they knew, what they assumed had been resolved by time alone. The case becomes part of local history, taught not as folklore but as fact, anchored by names, dates, outcomes. Parents talk to children about patience, about the long arc of accountability, about how the past can reach forward if it is allowed to endure. And in quieter moments, when the noise has moved on, when the legal machinery has completed its work, the true impact settles in. A life lost has been acknowledged. A truth denied by time has been affirmed. The cold case is no longer cold, but it is not warm either. It exists now in a different state, one defined not by mystery but by meaning. The years that separated crime from consequence remain, unbridgeable and heavy, yet within that distance lies a singular, undeniable fact. The silence did not win. Time moves differently after a verdict, after sentence, after a case is officially closed. It does not rush forward the way headlines do. It drifts. It settles. In the weeks that follow, the story enters a quieter phase, one without court dates or press conferences, where consequences unfold slowly and privately. For the victim's family, mornings arrive without the familiar ache of anticipation. There is no next hearing to prepare for, no next revelation to brace against. Instead, there is space, uncomfortable, unfamiliar space, where the question marks used to live. They begin to notice small changes. Sleep comes easier to some, harder to others. Dreams shift shape. Conversations no longer circle endlessly around what might have happened, who might have known, why nothing was done sooner. Those questions still exist, but they no longer dominate every exchange. Grief does not disappear. It reorganizes. It becomes less frantic, more reflective. They visit places they once avoided. They open boxes long left untouched. Photographs resurface, no longer evidence, just memories again. There is pain in that, but also permission. For the investigators, the case lingers in subtler ways. They catch themselves thinking about it during routine calls, during late-night paperwork, during moments when a new file lands on their desk with the same hollow weight. They remember the early days of reopening the investigation, the skepticism they faced, the warnings about chasing ghosts. They remember the first lab result that made them stop breathing for a second, the quiet realization that the past was not finished. Now, with the outcome secured, they feel something close to pride, but it is tempered by humility. They know how narrow the margin was between resolution and permanent silence. Training sessions incorporate the case as an example, but not as a triumph alone. It is presented as a cautionary tale about preservation, about assumptions, about the danger of letting time become an excuse. Younger detectives listen closely, absorbing the lesson that patience must be paired with vigilance, that progress often depends on decisions made long before technology is ready to reward them. The case becomes part of institutional memory, shaping how future investigations are approached, how evidence is cataloged, how cold does not mean forgotten. The defendant's world contracts rapidly. Letters are written, then rewritten, then sometimes never sent. Family members grapple with their own recalibration of reality, forced to reconcile the person they knew with the facts now cemented in public record. Some remain loyal, others withdraw, unsure how to navigate the weight of association. The routines of incarceration impose structure, but they do not impose understanding. Time stretches again, this time in the opposite direction, heavy with inevitability. The past is finally caught up, and there is no distance left to hide in. Beyond those directly involved, the community absorbs the story in fragments. At first, it is discussed openly, in diners, at school events, during long drives home. People revisit where they were when it happened, what they heard, what they assumed. Old rumors are dissected, corrected, laid to rest. Gradually, the conversations thin out, replaced by newer concerns, newer stories. But the case leaves an imprint. It alters the way people think about unsolved crimes, about the patience of truth, about the quiet persistence of evidence waiting for its moment. Media coverage shifts tone as well. Follow-up pieces explore the science behind the DNA match, the evolution of forensic databases, the ethical considerations of reopening decades-old cases. Commentators debate the balance between closure and delay, between justice and finality. Some praise the system for its eventual success. Others criticize the years of inaction that preceded it. Both perspectives coexist, neither fully satisfying because the story resists simplification. It is not a tale of failure redeemed or triumph delayed. It is something messy, something human. In academic circles, the case is cited in discussions about cold case policy, about funding priorities, about the responsibility of law enforcement agencies to revisit unresolved crimes proactively rather than reactively. It becomes a data point in larger analyses, stripped of names and emotions, reduced to variables and outcomes. Yet even there, among charts and models, its weight is felt. It represents not just a solved case, but a reminder of how many remain unsolved, how many truths are still suspended in time. And then there are the quieter echoes, the ones that do not make reports or headlines. A neighbor who finally understands a childhood memory that never quite made sense. A former witness who realizes, too late, that something they dismissed might have mattered. An investigator who looks at an old box of evidence differently now, aware that within it might be another waiting story. These moments ripple outward, subtle but enduring, changing perceptions in ways that are hard to measure but impossible to ignore. As months turn into years, the case settles into history, but it does not fade. It remains a reference, a reminder, a testament to the idea that time does not erase responsibility. The cold case is no longer defined by its silence, but by what emerged from it when patience met possibility. The truth did not arrive quickly. It did not arrive gently, but it arrived intact, carrying with it the full weight of what had been lost and what had been denied. And in that arrival, something fundamental was affirmed, not just about one crime, one victim, one community, but about the nature of truth itself. It waits. It endures. And when it finally speaks, it changes everything, even if it comes decades late, even if it leaves behind as many questions as it answers. In the long aftermath, after the cameras have packed up and the courtroom lights have dimmed, the case continues to live in ways that are invisible to most. It lives in habits altered without conscious thought, in emotional reflexes reshaped by years of uncertainty and sudden resolution. For the family, the calendar no longer revolves around anniversaries of loss, yet those dates still carry a gravity that cannot be ignored. They mark them quietly now, without dread, without expectation, acknowledging not just what was taken but what endured in its absence. There is a subtle shift in how they speak about the past. The language changes. Where once there were questions, there are statements. Where there was speculation, there is fact. The story no longer bends under the weight of uncertainty. It stands upright, painful but stable. This stability does not heal, but it anchors. It allows memory to exist without constantly searching for missing pieces. Personal belongings that once felt too heavy to touch are slowly reintegrated into daily life. A jacket worn again. A photograph placed back on a shelf rather than hidden away. These acts are not symbolic in intention, but they become symbolic in effect. They signal a reclaiming of narrative, a decision to let the victim be remembered for who they were, not solely for how they died or how long justice took to arrive. For law enforcement, the case continues to reverberate internally. Policies are reviewed, procedures questioned, archives revisited with new scrutiny. The solved case becomes a benchmark against which others are measured. Investigators grow more cautious about closing doors permanently, more aware of the potential longevity of evidence. There is a collective understanding now that progress does not always move forward in a straight line, that sometimes it loops back, re-examines, corrects itself. Young officers hear the story not as legend, but as warning. They are taught that mistakes made early can echo for decades, that diligence is not optional, that every item logged and preserved carries a future it has not yet revealed. The Wisconsin case reshapes institutional memory, embedding itself into training not as a victory lap, but as a reminder of responsibility. The broader public absorbs the lesson in its own way. Trust in forensic science deepens, but so does skepticism about delay. Conversations emerge about funding, about prioritization, about whose cases are revisited and whose remain untouched. The story becomes a reference point in debates about justice, cited by advocates and critics alike. It complicates easy narratives. It resists being used as proof of perfection or proof of failure. It exists somewhere in between. Meanwhile, the convicted individual recedes from public consciousness, becoming a name in records, a statistic in reports. But for those closest to the case, he remains a presence, a reminder that accountability can arrive long after concealment feels permanent. His life is now measured by constraints, by routine, by a future defined within limits. The weight of time presses differently on him now, not as an ally, but as an inescapable mirror. There is no universal moment of peace that follows resolution. Instead, there are fragments of acceptance scattered across time. A morning without tension, a conversation that ends without looping back, a memory recalled without flinching. These moments accumulate quietly, building something that resembles closure, but never fully becomes it. Closure, they learn, is not a destination. It is a practice. The case, once defined by its coldness, now holds a different temperature. It is not warm. It does not comfort. But it no longer freezes progress. It allows movement. It allows life to continue without constantly orbiting an unanswered question. In that sense, it has done all it can. And as years pass, the story remains, not as an open wound, but as a scar etched into collective memory. It reminds those who know it that truth is patient, that justice is not always timely, and that silence, no matter how long it stretches, is never the final word. By the time the story reaches its final quiet, it no longer feels like an ending at all. It feels like a settling, like dust after a collapse, slowly drifting down, revealing the shape of what was always there beneath the chaos. The Wisconsin cold case, once a wound that refused to close, now exists as a fixed point in time, no longer bleeding, no longer unanswered, but still deeply felt. In the community, life resumes its ordinary rhythms, yet nothing is quite the same. Streets look unchanged, houses stand where they always have, but the knowledge carried by those who live there alters the landscape. People understand now that normalcy can be deceptive, that years can pass with truth hiding in plain sight. There is a new attentiveness in the way neighbors observe, in the way stories are listened to, in the way unanswered questions are treated with respect rather than dismissal. For the victim's family, the passage of time takes on a different texture. They are no longer waiting for a call that might never come. The phone ringing no longer triggers dread. The case no longer defines every introduction, every conversation. Their loved one's name is no longer followed immediately by uncertainty. It stands on its own, whole, accompanied by truth rather than speculation. That distinction matters more than they ever expected. They speak now of the future, without guilt. They plan without feeling like they are abandoning the past. They understand that remembering does not require remaining frozen. Justice, even delayed, has granted them permission to move forward without carrying the full weight of unanswered loss. The grief remains, but it is no longer sharpened by doubt. Within law enforcement, the case becomes part of a larger reckoning. Files once considered dormant are revisited with renewed seriousness. Advances in DNA analysis are no longer treated as abstract potential, but as urgent opportunity. The solved case fuels new cold case units, new funding proposals, new commitments. It stands as proof that patience paired with technology can break even the longest silence. Yet there is also humility, an acknowledgement that justice arrived late, that years passed when it could have arrived sooner. This awareness tempers celebration, grounding success in responsibility. The system did not triumph unconditionally. It corrected itself. That distinction remains important. The convicted man fades further into obscurity, his story shrinking as the victim's story expands. His identity becomes secondary, his actions fixed and unchanging in the record. He no longer controls the narrative. He no longer occupies the center. The focus returns, where it always should have been, to the life that was interrupted, to the truth that waited so long to be spoken. As decades continue to roll forward, the case will be cited, referenced, analyzed. It will appear in textbooks, documentaries, training modules. But for those who lived inside it, who carried it through unanswered years, it will always be something more intimate. A reminder of how fragile certainty can be. of how resilient truth is, of how time, though relentless, does not have the final say. And in the quiet spaces where the story once screamed for resolution, there is now a different sound. Not silence, but understanding. The kind that lingers. The kind that reshapes memory. The kind that proves that even after 30 years, even after doubt hardens into habit, even after hope learns to whisper instead of shout, the truth can still emerge. Not loudly, not easily, but completely.